There are moments in time when the ordinary breaks and the voice of the eternal whispers into history. Moments when the calendar is no longer just a date but a doorway. January 14 is such a moment, for on this day God speaks not in the thunder of mountains nor the shaking of nations, but in the quiet stirring that awakens the soul. My friends, today we stand on the threshold of a secret alert from heaven. Not a message of fear but of revelation. Not a warning to destroy but a calling to awaken. For God does not hide secrets to keep us in darkness. He hides them so we may seek, rise, and return to Him. January 14 is not simply a day, it is a signpost, a divine whisper calling us to attention. Something is shifting, something is being unveiled. And if we have ears to hear and hearts willing to receive, we will discover that what God reveals in the hidden places has the power to change our lives in the open. So today, open your heart, still your spirit, for what I am about to share is not just a message. It is an alert from the Almighty. There are moments in a life and moments in a nation when the ordinary rhythms of days are interrupted not by human hands, but by the whisper of the eternal. Moments when time itself shifts, when a date becomes more than ink on a calendar, when it becomes a sign, a signal, a sounding from heaven that something hidden is about to be revealed. January 14 is such a moment. It stands not as a random point in time, but as a doorway through which God sends a secret alert to those with ears willing to hear and hearts willing to awaken. For the messages of God do not always come in the storms, nor in the shaking of mountains, nor in the trumpet blasts of nations. Many times they come in the stillness, in the quiet stirring of the Spirit, in the small whisper that carries the weight of eternity. January 14 is not marked in textbooks. It is not written in the annals of earthly power, but heaven has written it in a different ink. For God chooses the days that man overlooks. He appoints times that seem insignificant so that only the attentive will notice. A secret alert is not something shouted in a marketplace or broadcast across the screens of a nation. It is not carried by the noise of crowds or the commotion of cities. A secret alert comes in the language of the Spirit. It comes wrapped in mystery, calling the soul to lean in, to seek, to listen more deeply than before. Br. Why January 14? Why this particular day? It is because God weaves mysteries into time. He threads meaning into the fabric of dates, moments, and seasons. He hides treasures in the ordinary, so that the one who seeks Him will find what others miss. January 14 is a divine whisper, a moment of alignment, a quiet signal that something is shifting in the unseen realm. It is the kind of date God uses to awaken, to prepare, to call forth a turning of the heart. When God speaks a secret, alert, it is not to frighten but to focus. Not to burden, but to bring clarity. Not to crush, but to call His people higher. Every day carries meaning, but not every day carries assignment. January 14 carries assignment. It is a date that stands like a watchman upon a wall, a day that presses upon the Spirit, urging us to pay attention. When heaven sends an alert, it is because something has moved, something has been positioned, something has been set in motion. And though the world may continue in its noise, its distractions, its endless cycles, the child of God senses the tremor, the gentle stirring beneath the surface. For God never alerts without purpose, never warns without love, never whispers without intention. The secret alert of January 14 is not about fear, it is about readiness. It is about awakening from slumber, shaking off complacency, and stepping into alignment with what God is doing. For long before a shaking is seen in the visible world, it first begins in the invisible. Before nations tremble, the winds shift. Before doors open or close, a word is spoken in the Spirit. Before change arrives, the alert is sent. Heaven never moves without giving a sign, and God never allows His people to walk blind into a moment meant to shape destiny. January 14 calls to us because it carries the scent of the prophetic, the weight of something concealed, now approaching the moment of unveiling. It is the kind of date that invites reflection. What have we missed? What have we ignored? What have we postponed? What have we allowed to drift into silence? Heaven often whispers on the days we treat as ordinary, testing whether we recognize His voice when it's quiet, not only when it thunders. A secret alert comes softly, but carries the power to shift a life, a family, a people, if only they would respond. To understand the weight of a divine alert, we must understand the patterns of God. He calls before he commands. He whispers before he reveals. He alerts before he acts, and he marks time with purpose. Consider how God called to Moses not in a palace but in a desert, not with a shout but with a flame that did not consume. Consider how he spoke to Elijah not in the wind nor the earthquake nor the fire, but in the still small voice. Consider how the birth of the Messiah was announced not to emperors but to shepherds under a quiet sky. God hides his greatest messages in the simplest places so that humility becomes the key to revelation. January 14 is a call to humility, to quiet our hearts long enough to hear what God is saying. It invites us to step out of distraction and into discernment. It invites us to weigh the times, to examine the condition of our hearts, to ask ourselves whether we are awake or merely drifting through life. Heaven's alerts often come when humanity is asleep, for it is in the night that the watchman must be most vigilant. When God sets a date as a signal, it is because he desires that we lift our eyes from earthly concerns and fix them on eternal truths. January 14 stands as a threshold. It marks a point where God desires to shift the posture of the heart. Maybe you have felt that things are changing but cannot explain how. Maybe you have sensed a pull within you, a stirring that refuses to leave. Maybe you have experienced an inner tension, a sense that something is approaching even if you cannot name it. That sense is not imagination. It is the Spirit responding to heaven's alert. The world may continue on as though nothing is amiss, but the soul aligned with God will feel the tremors before they become earthquakes. A secret alert does not always point to one event. Sometimes it points to a season. Sometimes the alert is not about a day, but about what that day awakens. For January 14 is not merely a date, but a doorway. It is the moment where God says, pay attention. What comes next requires your awareness. It is a call to readiness, not in fear, but in faith. A call to examine the paths we walk, the choices we make, the voices we follow. It is a summons to return to the place of sensitivity where the heart is tuned to the frequency of heaven. When God appoints a secret alert, it is not because he desires to hide, but because he desires to reveal to those willing to seek. The mystery of January 14 is that it is both concealed and revealed. Concealed to those who treat the sacred as common, but revealed to those who honor the voice of God above the noise of the world. It is a date that invites us to slow down, to listen, to discern the pulse of the eternal in the midst of the temporary. For the world teaches us to rush, but God teaches us to wait. The world teaches us to consume, but God teaches us to contemplate. The world teaches us to dismiss the small, but God teaches us that the small often hides the significant. This alert is a reminder that God still speaks, still directs, still leads his people. It is a reminder that he is not silent, even when the world grows loud. He is not distant, even when life feels chaotic. He is not passive, even when circumstances feel stagnant. Heaven is active. Heaven is moving. Heaven is calling. And January 14 is the whisper of that movement, the hint of what lies ahead, the urging of God that now is the time to awaken to what he is aligning. It is often said that God speaks through events, through signs, through wonders. But he also speaks through dates, through moments we are tempted to overlook. He uses the turning of days to mark the turning of seasons. He uses the calendar to signal the calendar of heaven. January 14 is a reminder that God's timing is not random, that his alerts are not accidental, that his messages are precise, intentional, and filled with purpose. This date stands as a spiritual signal, and those who heed it will walk into the next season with clarity rather than confusion. A secret alert is not only about what is coming, it is about who we must become. January 14 calls us to transformation, to release what we have carried that no longer aligns with God's will. It calls us to lay down old fears, old wounds, old burdens, old sins, old excuses. For when God alerts, he is preparing us for movement. And movement requires lightness. It requires surrender. It requires willingness to let go. Heaven's alerts are invitations to step into alignment with the purposes of God, to position ourselves for what He desires to do in and through our lives. January 14 whispers to the heart that now is the time to awaken the gifts long buried, the callings long ignored, the dreams long abandoned. For God does not alert us simply to warn. He alerts us to activate. There are purposes asleep within you that heaven is now calling forth. There are strengths within you that trials have hidden, which God now desires to uncover. There are prayers you stopped praying that God is now urging you to revive. A secret alert is the sound of destiny knocking, waiting for us to open the door. When God calls attention to a date, it is because He seeks partnership. Heaven does not operate in isolation from those on earth. God invites us to align our steps with His movements. He invites us to respond, to rise, to shift, to prepare. And January 14 carries such an invitation. It calls us to sharpen our discernment, to deepen our faith, to heighten our awareness of His voice. It reminds us that distraction is the enemy of destiny and that focus is the friend of purpose. The significance of January 14 lies not in human history, but in divine intention. It is a reminder that God can transform any moment into a message, any day into a divine appointment, any date into a summons from heaven. It stands as a testimony that the God who governs eternity still governs time, that He still marks moments, still sends alerts, still stirs the hearts of His people. The world may not notice, but heaven does not require the world's attention, only yours. And so January 14 becomes a call to rise from spiritual sleep. It becomes a reminder that the time for hesitation is past, that the time for spiritual drifting has ended, that the time for alignment is now. It is a silent trumpet speaking to the inner chambers of the heart, urging us to recognize that the Spirit is moving and we must move with Him. For when God issues an alert, it is because a new season is birthing, and what we do in this moment will shape how we enter the next. There are seasons when God speaks not through thunder, but through timing. There are days when the heavens seem quiet, yet the silence carries the weight of eternity. January 14 is such a day. It is not merely a point in time, it is a signal, a secret alert sent from the heart of heaven to awaken those who are listening. The world may pass it over, wrapped in its routines and distractions, but the soul that is attuned to God senses the movement, senses the tremor beneath the surface, senses the whisper of change carried on the winds of destiny. Every alert from God carries intention. Every date appointed by the Almighty carries purpose. And so January 14 calls us to pause, to perceive, to recognize that the ordinary we perceive is often the canvas upon which extraordinary divine instruction is written. God's alerts are never without reason. They are never accidental. They are precise, like the hands of a master clockmaker arranging the hours so that every movement aligns perfectly with a greater design. January 14 is not just a day, it is a hinge upon which the next season swings. The alert is not for those who are asleep, for those whose hearts are heavy with distraction, for those who have ignored the whisperings of the Spirit. It is for the attentive, for the seekers, for those who have trained themselves to listen for the soft voice beneath the noise. A secret alert does not strike with immediate visibility. It does not announce itself in the streets or demand attention in a way that the untrained eye can see. It begins quietly, subtly, imperceptibly to the world, but unmistakably to the soul that is ready. It begins as a nudge, a stirring in the spirit, a pull towards something unseen. January 14 carries this movement. It carries the kind of weight that, if ignored, leaves the heart unprepared for what is to come. But if recognized, it becomes a source of clarity, guidance, and preparation for the unfolding purposes of God. Time itself can become a messenger. God weaves His intentions into the sequence of days, marking moments with meaning that only spiritual discernment can fully understand. There are days that feel ordinary until God moves, and then they become extraordinary. January 14 is such a day. It may appear like any other day, passing in the rhythm of work, obligations, and routines, yet beneath the surface, heaven is moving. The alert sent on this day is a call to align, a call to awaken, a call to examine the heart, the mind, and the spirit for readiness. The secret alert of January 14 is also a reminder that God's timing is not like human timing. Man measures in seconds, minutes, and hours. God measures in seasons, purposes, and eternal consequence. What seems like delay or randomness to the eye of man is precision to the eye of heaven. A divine alert may precede visible events by days, weeks, or even years because the alert is meant to prepare the vessel, not merely to announce the event. Preparation is the foundation upon which destiny is built, and January 14 is a day appointed for preparation in the hidden realms of the Spirit. When God alerts, He invites. When He calls attention, He beckons His children to step into a posture of readiness. January 14 is a call to examine ourselves, to ask whether we are awake, whether we are aware, whether we are sensitive to the stirrings of the Spirit. It is a day to set aside distraction, to quiet the mind, to listen with intention. For the secret alert is not a casual notice. It is a summons to action, to vigilance, to attentiveness. It is the kind of alert that asks the question, are you ready for what heaven is about to release? God often works in patterns, and His patterns are revealed to those who seek. He calls before He acts. He warns before He moves. He nudges before He shifts. He aligns before He elevates. January 14 is part of that divine pattern. It is a reminder that the unfolding of God's purposes is not random, but meticulously arranged. To ignore it is to risk walking unprepared into a moment of divine opportunity. To recognize it is to enter into the alignment of heaven, to position oneself for blessing, insight, and movement. The secret alert of January 14 also carries a sense of urgency without panic. There is a tension in alertness that sharpens the senses, heightens perception, and awakens the spirit. God's alerts are never designed to terrorize. They are designed to awake and to clarify, to bring discernment. They draw attention to the unseen, to the spiritual currents flowing beneath the surface of life. Currents that, if followed, carry those who are attentive into alignment with divine purpose. In history, God has always moved through signs and seasons. He has always spoken through time as much as through circumstance. There are days that changed everything for those who were attentive. There are moments when a subtle alert from heaven became the hinge of destiny for an entire generation. January 14 is such a day. Its significance is hidden to the world, but open to those who are spiritually awake. The alert is both subtle and profound, quiet and powerful. It calls the soul to attention, the mind to reflection, and the spirit to readiness. No alert from God comes without preparation. It is always preceded by a period of quiet reflection and awareness. It is often marked by a feeling that something is shifting, something is approaching, something is about to unfold that has eternal consequence. January 14 carries that atmosphere. It is a date that invites the faithful to notice, to reflect, to seek the Spirit for guidance. It is a day that presses the question, are you prepared for what is coming, even if you cannot yet see it? The secret alert also reminds us of the responsibility of attention. God gives signals not for entertainment, not for curiosity, but for response. A divine alert carries weight because it calls for action. Even when the action is only an awareness, in listening and aligning, it is still action. Every alert from heaven is an invitation to engage with eternity. January 14 is such a moment. To respond is to participate in God's purposes. To ignore is to drift in the currents of time, potentially missing the opening of opportunity that is already unfolding unseen. Heaven often communicates through what the world considers small, ordinary, or insignificant. It is in the quiet moments that God moves most profoundly. A whisper is as powerful as a shout when the Spirit is attentive. A hidden alert is as potent as a public announcement when the heart is prepared. January 14 is quiet yet profound. It does not rely on spectacle to command attention. It relies on the readiness of those willing to notice, the humility of those willing to bow, the sensitivity of those willing to hear. God's secret alerts are also about refining the heart. They call attention to what is misaligned, what is delayed, what is neglected, what is unprepared. January 14 may reveal areas where we have drifted, where we have ignored the Spirit, where we have postponed obedience. It is a call to align with truth, to release what hinders, and to embrace what God has been preparing. The alert carries correction as well as direction. It carries preparation as well as promise. It carries awareness as well as opportunity. Time itself becomes sacred in moments like these. A day is no longer measured merely by work or routine, but by potential to receive, perceive, and respond to God's movement. January 14 is a sacred moment marked by the Spirit, a temporal point that carries eternal weight. Those who perceive it will find themselves moving in rhythm with heaven. Those who ignore it may wonder later what shifted, why doors opened, or why seasons changed without their awareness. The secret alert also teaches us patience. God moves according to His purposes, not according to our timetable. The alert does not always mean immediate action, but it always calls for spiritual awareness. January 14th may be a moment to prepare internally, to discern spiritually, to position oneself in faith and obedience. The visible world may not yet shift, but the invisible currents are already flowing. To recognize this is to step into alignment with heaven and to position oneself for the movement that will manifest in due season. God's alerts remind us that history is not random and that destiny is not accidental. Every day carries potential, but some days carry weight beyond their appearance. January 14 is one such day. It is a day hidden to the world but illuminated to the heart that watches, listens, and discerns. It is a call to awareness, a call to vigilance, a call to attune the soul to the currents of heaven. The alert also reminds us of the importance of readiness. Readiness is not simply physical or mental preparedness. It is spiritual alignment, a posture of openness to God, a willingness to respond to His whisper before it becomes a shout. January 14 calls for readiness, asking us to examine our priorities, our commitments, our focus, our hearts. It asks whether we are ready to move with God when He moves, to receive when He pours out, to walk in His timing rather than our own. Heaven's secret alerts are invitations to live with awareness, to live with purpose, to live attuned to the invisible currents that shape eternity. They remind us that life is not random, that God is active, that destiny is moving, that time is sacred, that every moment carries meaning if we choose to see it. January 14 is such an alert, a call to attention, a call to alignment, a call to the heart to recognize that heaven is active and that we are invited to participate in what He is doing.